By late afternoon the light had turned the color of old parchment, and the river lay ahead like a long, unblinking eye. It cut the valley from shoulder to hip, a slow current under a skin of cold light, and there was only one way across that didn't involve drowning, a bridge that had been charred and half-eaten by the war. The platoon crouched among thistles and broken fence posts while Morrow took a knee on the ridge and studied the span. The bridge's deck was a patchwork of scorched planks and exposed girders. In places the timbers were gone altogether, leaving ribs that showed daylight. The stone abutments were cracked, spitting dust with every distant concussion. Calder blew air through his teeth. She was built for wagons and prayers. Then we'll drive on both, Rabbit said, pretending to be brave for the men behind him. Downriver, artillery pounded the far bank in neat, murderous intervals, walking shells along the reeds. Upriver, a copse of poplars shed grey leaves that spiraled like tiny flags of surrender. Between the two, the bridge waited, indifferent. Leo stood on the tank's hull with one hand on the commander's hatch and the other on his toy. He looked at the bridge the way children look at puzzles, considering the shapes until a path revealed itself. Then he raised his toy tank and traced a careful line across the air, not straight down the center, but dog-legging to the right where a pair of blackened beams held together like clasped fingers. Morrow followed the gesture. There was a path there if you were willing to believe in small mercies, to intact stringers tied to the upstream side, a surviving deck panel halfway across, another panel 3/4 over, a serpentine route. One wrong inch and 30 tons would go into the river like a bell. He touched the radio stud. Listen up. We cross one at a time and we cross without stopping. Tank first, slow, steady, weight on the live beams. Infantry follows single file on the rails, 2 yards behind the tracks. If the bridge complains, you do not. There's no turning back. The lieutenant at his elbow swallowed. If she fails under the tank, then we swim, Morrow said, and made it sound like a joke. They staged in the cover of the ditch. Rabbit checked the net. The enemy was arguing with its own angles. Their artillery had the rhythm of someone counting wrong. A sliver of grace. Calder, Morrow said, settling into the cupola with Leo beside him. Line up on the upstream stringers. First gear. No sudden throttle. Treat it like ice in church shoes. Copy, Calder whispered, a little prayer of his own. The platoon spread along the bank. Men adjusted helmet straps that did not need adjusting and told quiet lies to their hands about how steady they were. Go, Morrow said. The tank rolled forward. The bridge answered with a long, unhappy creak that started in the stone and ran through the timbers into their bones. The first set of planks held. The left track kissed the outer stringer, the right track found the companion beam, the hull settled into the channel of weight the way a river finds its bed. Keep her straight, Morrow breathed. Calder eased the clutch, feathered the throttle. Every bolt, every rivet, every pin in the running gears seemed to announce itself. The bridge gave back a dozen voices, nails complaining, beams remembering fires, ropes of fiber sighing where rot had stolen their conviction. Halfway out, the deck vanished into open rib. Ahead, the first intact panel sat skewed, as if embarrassed to still be there. It looked too narrow, too tired. Leo touched Morrow's forearm. A small, urgent pat. He pointed not at the panel, but at the shadow just to its right, where a cross brace met the stringer. Then he set his toy down and, with both hands, showed Calder a child's pantomime of gentling, slow, softer, softer still. Right ahead, Morrow translated ease. Let the ribs carry. He didn't know why he trusted a toddler over 30 tons of physics, but he did. Calder drifted right a thumb's width. The first rib took the weight with a drum-like thud, then the second, and the panel accepted the right track with a reluctant groan. The left track rode iron and air, chewing at splinters of memory. For 3 heartbeats, they were a coin rolling on its edge. A shell landed upriver with a slap that lifted a sheet of water. Spray drifted down on them like cold confetti. Someone laughed once sharp, almost a sob, and then shut it down. 2 more car lengths, Rabbit said softly, watching the span's far abutment through his sight like it would move if he spoke too loud. Another yard. Another. The bridge tilted infinitesimally as a beam somewhere below them gave up on being wood and returned to being idea. The hull shifted a degree. Calder corrected with wrists instead of arms. Leo made a tiny sound and pointed ahead left, where a jag of deck flared out like a tongue. The gap between it and the next surviving board was nothing, and also a chasm. Left thread, Morrow said. Now. Calder nudged. The left track climbed the tongue, the right track slid across clean iron. Everything in the hull vibrated at the same frequency as Morrow's heart. They reached the 3/4 panel. It looked better from far away. Up close it had the soft feel of bread left too long in rain. Calder set the right track gently on it. The plank bowed, complained, but did not break. The left track rode the beam like a tightrope walker who has decided that dignity is overrated and survival is everything. 2 more meters, Rabbit said through his teeth. Don't die now, I don't want to write this report. The tank's nose crossed the invisible line where structure became land again. The far stone abutment received them with a grunt of stone on steel. The suspension uncoiled, and the hull climbed onto honest ground. Morrow didn't breathe. He turned and watched the rest of the tank come off the ribs, first the idlers, then the final drive, and only when both tracks were fully on the far bank did he let air into his chest. Clear, he said, voice low, and only then realized his hands were shaking. Cheers would have been an insult to whoever had just decided not to kill them. The men on the near bank answered with movement instead. The first file stepped onto the outer rail, arms out for balance, eyes fixed on the tank like it was a magnet pulling them across. They moved heel to toe, boots whispering. Behind them, the second file followed, staggered, each man counting courage in inches. Artillery woke up to their plan like a late guest who wants to make an entrance. A shell struck near the near abutment and popped a geyser of rock chips. Another went long, hurling clods into the river. The bridge shivered. Faster, the lieutenant called, not shouting, willing. Leo watched the line with cathedral solemnity. He put his toy on the hatch edge and, with both hands free, held them out like a conductor, keeping a tempo only he could hear, slow enough not to stumble, quick enough not to die. The men glanced up, saw the small hands, and matched their steps to the boy's silent count. It was absurd and holy. Halfway across, a plank under the third man split with a pistol crack. He pitched sideways, arms pinwheeling. Another soldier behind him lunged and caught his webbing, dragging him up and forward in the same motion. No one fell. No one stopped. Calder kept the tank idling on the far bank with the hull angled to cover the bridge with its side armor. If the enemy tried to rake the span with machine guns, his gun would answer faster than a prayer. The last man stepped onto stone. Rabbit exhaled a laugh that sounded like he'd found money in an old coat. Morrow keyed the net. All across. The bridge, relieved of purpose, sagged. A brace somewhere deep in its belly side apart. A segment of deck dropped into the river with a quiet, almost polite splash. Then another. The span rearranged itself around absence. Back doors gone, Calder said. Good, Morrow replied. We weren't going back. They moved off the bank into a screen of alders. The air smelled like wet bark and cordite. Behind them, the ruined bridge came apart with the slow dignity of a building bowing out of a performance. The river took what fell without comment. In the brief quiet that followed, the men found their voices. The lieutenant clapped shoulders. Someone swore with surprising tenderness. A medic checked blisters that had become full-fledged citizens. No one looked long at the water. Morrow squatted beside the tank and finally looked at Leo. The boy was rubbing black dust between thumb and forefinger, as if it were a riddle that might speak up if handled kindly. His sweater had a new tear at the elbow. He noticed Morrow watching and lifted his toy tank, tapping its turret twice against the real one. "You and you together." "Thank you," Morrow said, and meant it with an odd, unsoldierly warmth that surprised him. Rabbit appeared with the radio pressed to his ear. "Message from a relay on the south slope," he said. "They're thin, but holding. If we can make the schoolhouse at Cross Hollow by nightfall, we get walls and a roof." "Schoolhouse," Calder said, tasting the word like a memory. Morrow scanned the terrain ahead, a shallow rise, a stand of birch, the road kinked like a broken finger, and beyond that a cluster of roofs that might once have been tidy. "We move," he said. "Staggered file. Keep to the hedges. If they shell the far bank, they're blind in the trees." They set out. The bridge behind them settled into legend. The river went on being a river. As they crested the next fold of ground, Leo reached for Morrow's sleeve. The boy didn't point this time. He just leaned in, pressing his head briefly against Morrow's arm the way a child does when the world has been loud for too long. Morrow's hand, without orders from any sergeant, touched the boy's hair once. "Nearly there," he said, knowing it was a promise he could not guarantee and making it anyway, because men like him built days out of promises and steel. Toward evening, the schoolhouse's roofline rose ahead, bombed, slumped, but standing. The platoon lengthened their stride. The tank, streaked with ash and river mist, rumbled at the front like a tired guardian. Behind them, where the bridge had been, the smoke thinned and lifted. The gap in the river's back looked clean, like a wound after the surgeon has done all he can. There would be no pursuit across that way tonight. "House of Whispers next," Rabbit said into the cupola, trying the title on his tongue. Morrow didn't answer. He was listening to the engine, making sure its heartbeat was still their own and to the smaller rhythm beside him. A child's breathing settling as the dark came down. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of Cross Hollow. A shell of red brick with its roof half collapsed, windows gaping like tired eyes. The courtyard was littered with desks and books, blackened by fire, their pages curled and fused into brittle wings. Chalk dust lingered in the air, though there was no chalkboard left to hold it. The platoon entered cautiously, rifles raised, boots crunching on plaster. No enemy fire greeted them, only silence, deep and waiting. "Clear left," Calder muttered. "Clear right," Rabbit answered, sweeping his barrel across what had once been a row of lockers. Their doors hung open, coughing out children's shoes, torn notebooks, a dented flute case. Leo padded forward as if he'd been here before. He stopped in the middle of the hall, staring at a child's drawing still pinned to the wall with a rusted tack. The paper had survived fire and rain by miracle. On it, stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. In the corner, a boxy shape colored green. A tank. The boy touched the paper lightly, then looked up at Morrow. His lips parted, and for the first time since the farmhouse, he spoke a full sentence. "My name is Leonid." The word was small, but it landed heavy. Soldiers who had seen too much in too few days felt something unclench. He wasn't just the boy anymore. He was Leonid, a person. "Leonid," Morrow repeated softly, as though the syllables were fragile glass. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's a good name. Strong." Rabbit cleared his throat, looking around at the ruined halls. "Seems the war couldn't burn everything. Some things stick." The men spread out, scavenging for supplies. They found a pantry with jars of pickled beets miraculously unbroken, a crate of canned milk, and a box of bandages that smelled of iodine but was still usable. It wasn't much, but it was something. Night fell heavy, wrapping the schoolhouse in a blanket of broken glass and wind. They lit a single lantern in the corner of what had been a classroom. The men sat in a rough circle, eating their rations, speaking in low tones. The tank loomed outside, framed in the broken doorway, its silhouette black against the bruised sky. Leonid sat on Calder's knee, toy tank in his lap. Calder showed him the driver's controls in his notebook, sketching clumsy diagrams. The boy traced the lines with his finger, humming under his breath. "Teaching him how to drive already?" Rabbit asked. "He already drives," Calder replied. "I'm just catching up." The men chuckled, and for the first time in days the sound didn't feel borrowed. Maro leaned against the wall, listening to the storm outside, the steady ticking of the lantern, and the boy's soft humming. He thought about the word Leonid, a child's name, a soldier's anchor. He thought about how tomorrow the circle around them would tighten again. But tonight, in this house of whispers, surrounded by fragments of laughter and learning, they were more than survivors. They were guardians. "Rest," Maro said quietly. "Tomorrow's coming fast." The platoon obeyed, laying down where they could, rifles within arm's reach. The tank outside kept its silent watch. And in the middle of it all, Leonid slept with his toy tank clutched to his chest, small chest rising and falling, as if even in dreams he was steering them forward. Morning broke without ceremony. No birdsong, no clear sky, just the heavy rumble of engines in the distance, circling, tightening. The platoon knew before Maro spoke. The enemy was coming in force, and this time there would be no probing, no hesitation. From the schoolhouses' shattered windows, they saw movement across the valley, armored silhouettes, slow and sure, and infantry fanning out like ink spreading in water. The ring was closing. Rabbit slammed his headset down. "Confirmed. At least 2 platoons of armor, maybe more infantry than we've got bullets for. They're not letting us walk away." Calder checked the ammo crate by the tank. 4 shells left. Half a belt of machine gun rounds. After that, sticks and stones. The lieutenant cursed under his breath. "We can't outlast them. They'll bleed us dry and sweep up the remains." The men fell silent. Some checked magazines that were already nearly empty. Others stared at the floorboards, as though answers might be carved into the grain. In the middle of it all, Leonid sat on the tank's glacis, clutching his toy. His small brow furrowed, as if he were listening to music no one else could hear. Then he hopped down, tugged at Maro's sleeve, and pointed to the field behind the schoolhouse. The ground there dipped into a shallow basin, half hidden by weeds. To an adult's eye, it looked useless, no cover, no exit. But Leonid walked into it, set his toy tank down, and pushed it in a slow circle, around and around, making V-R-R-V-R-R noises under his breath. Then he looked up and mimed soldiers running the other way. Rabbit blinked. "Hayes showing us a diversion." "Not just that," Maro said slowly. "He wants the tank to draw them off, pretend to break out, pull their fire, while the wounded and medics slip out through the culvert." The lieutenant frowned. "It's suicide. Or survival," Maro countered. His eyes were on the boy. "Look at him. Hayes not guessing. He knows." The silence stretched. Finally Calder exhaled. "If the kid's right, we get the wounded clear. If Hayes wrong, we die faster." Rabbit grinned without humor. "Not much of a choice, then." They moved fast. The medics prepared stretchers, bundling the 2 worst cases, men pale with blood loss, too weak to walk. The culvert behind the school led into the drainage ditch beyond. With luck, the enemy wouldn't notice shadows crawling in the grass. Meanwhile, Calder primed the engine. The tank coughed and growled, louder than it had in days. The platoon clambered aboard or crouched behind its armor, rifles ready. Leonid perched beside Maro in the commander's hatch, his toy clutched like a staff of office. "Ready," Calder said, knuckles white on the controls. Maro raised his hand. "On my mark," the first shell screamed in, detonating against the schoolhouse. Bricks exploded outward in a cloud of dust and chalk. The house of whispers became a house of screams. "Mark!" The tank lurched forward, smoke billowing. Its cannon roared. the shot slamming into an enemy half-track and flipping it like a toy kicked aside. The platoon opened fire in ragged unison, pouring everything they had left into the enemy line. Across the field, the enemy reacted just as Leonid had predicted, turning all their fury toward the charging beast. Machine guns raked the ground, artillery adjusted, armor pivoted to intercept. "Keep them on us," Maro shouted. "Hold their eyes here." The tank circled the basin, treads tearing earth, making a show of reckless defiance. Another shell screamed out, striking a light armored car and setting it ablaze. The smoke rose thick, curling like a black flag. Behind the chaos, the medics moved, crawling through the culvert with their burden. One by one, the wounded disappeared into the weeds, shadows slipping out of the noose. The enemy pressed harder. A shell struck near the tank, flipping men into the air. Calder swore, fighting the controls. Rabbit fired until his barrel glowed, then slapped in his last magazine. Leonid stood tall in the hatch, hair whipping in the wind, pointing again and again, guiding the turret like he had been born for it. When the final shell fired, punching a crater into the earth that swallowed a squad whole, the boy clapped once, satisfied. "Out of ammo," Calder cried. "Then we make noise," Mara said. He fired the coaxial machine gun until it clicked dry, sparks spraying from its exhausted throat. The tank growled, but its teeth were gone. Yet by then, the wounded were clear. The medics signaled from the ditch, arms waving desperately. The diversion had worked. Maro slammed his fist against the hatch rim. "Pull back! Smoke and scatter!" Grenades popped, filling the basin with grey veils. The platoon peeled away in twos and threes, vanishing into the confusion. The tank reversed, tracks screaming, slipping back toward the cover of the trees. The enemy fired blind, convinced they were crushing a breakout. They didn't see the medics or the crawling shadows slipping past their flank. By the time the smoke thinned, the basin was empty except for torn earth and burning wrecks. The noose had tightened only too close on smoke and echoes. They regrouped in a gully a mile away, battered but alive. 2 men missing, 4 wounded but carried clear. Against all odds, the platoon was still whole enough to fight another day. Maro sank to the ground, exhaustion pulling at every joint. He looked at Leonid, who sat on the tank's track with his toy in his lap, utterly calm. The boy looked back, eyes steady, then nodded once as if to say, "It is done." Rabbit shook his head in wonder. "That kid's not just lucky. He's something else." "Whatever he is," Mara said, "he's ours. And he just bought us another sunrise." The gully gave them a few hours of uneasy breathing. The men patched wounds, shared the last of the canned milk, and tried not to look at the sky, which kept grumbling like a giant thinking about getting up. By afternoon, the enemy began to press again. From the ridgeline, black shapes moved armor, infantry, the iron teeth of a grinder. Every man knew they couldn't hold another full push. The platoon was cracked glass, one more blow would shatter them. Rabbit wrestled with the radio, sweat dripping down his temples. Come on, he muttered. Then suddenly clarity. A voice sharp as a nail hammered through the static. "Reinforcements inbound, smoke markers on position, hold, if you can say again." Rabbit begged, eyes wide. The voice returned, "Hold south, units crossing 10 minutes." He ripped the headset off. "They're coming. I swear to God. They're coming." The men looked at each other. 10 minutes. A lifetime and a heartbeat. The enemy didn't plan to give them 10 minutes. Mortar began to drop, plumes of dirt bursting along the gully's lip. Shrapnel whined through the air, gouging earth, punching holes in silence. "Back to the tank," Maro ordered. They piled in and around the steel beast. Calder primed the engine, it roared, coughing smoke. Rabbit grabbed the last of grenades. The lieutenant tightened his jaw, preparing to die with a straight back. And then Leonid stood up in the commander's hatch, toy tank pressed to his chest. He looked east, then north, scanning with a solemnity that didn't belong to a 3-year-old. Finally, he raised his free hand and pointed at the sky. "Smoke," he whispered. Morrow frowned. "Smoke." Then he understood. "Rabbit Marcus. Now." Rabbit yanked the pin on a smoke canister and hurled it high. It burst in a billow of white, curling upward. The wind caught it, stretching it into a long banner. Against the darkening sky, it looked like a flag pale, defiant, waving where no flag should have survived. The enemy saw it too. They hesitated. Confused. Was it surrender? Was it signal? The pause bought seconds, precious and rare. And then the horizon answered. Engines thundered. Armor crested the ridge to the south. Friendly colors, friendly insignia. Tanks rolled in formation, their guns barking, their machine guns stitching the ridgeline. Infantry surged like a tide, their battle cries rolling louder than the mortar. Reinforcements. The enemy's confidence fractured. Their line faltered under the hammer of fresh firepower. Some broke and ran. Others fell where they stood. The news snapped. The platoon erupted in disbelief and laughter. Men shouted until their throats broke. Rabbit fired into the sky just to spend the last of his ammunition. Calder pounded the driver's controls like a drum. And at the center of it all was Leonid, perched on the turret, the smoke curling behind him like a banner stitched from heaven itself. A soldier from the reinforcements, eyes wide, pointed at the child. "Who the hell, our commander?" Rabbit shouted back, grinning through grime and blood. "The smallest damn general you'll ever see." The fresh troops swarmed past, chasing the enemy into retreat. The battlefield, filled with dust and fire and the ragged sound of survival. When it finally quieted, when only smoke and echoes remained, the platoon gathered around their tank. They were battered, bleeding, missing pieces of themselves but alive. Morrow looked at Leonid. The boy hugged his toy tank, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, and leaned against the hatch rim. For the first time since the farmhouse, Morrow let himself smile without reserve. "You did it," he said softly. "You carried us through." Above them, the last plume of white smoke drifted higher, unraveling into the sky. Not a flag of surrender, but a flag of survival. The war ended not with one thunderclap, but with a long, uneven silence. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and slowly the guns quieted, the smoke thinned, the maps stopped bleeding. For those who survived, life felt like walking out of a storm cellar after the tornado had passed. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. For Sergeant Morrow and what remained of his platoon, the end came with orders written in a different kind of ink. You are going home. But before home, there was one more duty. The capital's square was dressed in banners and brass. Soldiers lined the boulevard in their pressed uniforms, boots polished until they threw back the sunlight. A military band waited with instruments gleaming, the trumpets nervous in their hands. Crowds pressed against the barriers. Families, workers, children on shoulders. They weren't cheering yet. They were holding their breath, waiting for the story they'd heard in whispers to step into daylight. At the far end of the platform stood the president, a tall man with hair gone gray at the edges and a chest weighed down with medals of his own. His eyes were steady, but even he seemed restless, as if the moment to come was larger than the office he wore. Morrow and his men marched in first, uniforms patched and faded, boots scuffed by miles of dirt roads. They were soldiers who had lived long in foxholes to care for parades, but they carried themselves tall. Behind them rumbled the tank, its armor scarred, its barrel nicked and blackened. The crowd gasped at the sight of it, as though the steel beast itself carried memory. And on top of the turret, holding his toy tank close against his chest, sat Leonid. He was small, his sweater freshly washed, but still frayed at the elbows, hair combed with more care than success. Yet when the crowd saw him, a murmur ran like a current through thousands of throats. Here was the boy from the stories, the boy on the tank. The president stepped forward. The square hushed. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Citizens," he said, his voice carrying over the hush. In times of war, we measure heroes by their courage, not their years. Some are forged by experience, others by destiny. Today, we honor a soldier whose bravery saved not only his comrades, but the very spirit of our nation. He beckoned. Maro lifted Leonid gently from the turret and set him on the platform. The boy blinked at the sea of faces, unafraid. His toy tank was still in his hand. The president knelt, bringing himself to the boy's height. From a velvet case, he drew a metal bronze and gold, its ribbon a proud crimson. He pinned it carefully to the boy's sweater, just above the stitched bear. For valor beyond measure, he said, his voice quieter now, but carrying farther somehow. For reminding us all that courage knows no age. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, shouts that tangled with tears. Mothers wept openly. Soldiers saluted, their arms snapping up as if pulled by a single thread. Leonid stood still, small shoulders squared, gaze steady. Then, almost shyly, he raised his toy tank high above his head. The crowd roared louder, their cheers rolling like thunder down the boulevard. Behind him, Maro and the platoon stood in formation. Hardened men, scarred and weary. But their eyes glistened. To them, Leonid wasn't a symbol. He was family. The band struck up an anthem, brass and drums swelling like sunlight over stone. The boy on the tank, their boy, was now the boy of a nation. When it was over, when the medal gleamed on his chest and the crowd's echoes faded, Leonid looked up at Maro. "Go home now?" he asked softly, in the voice of a child again. Maro crouched, nodded once and smiled. "Yes, son, home." And together, under a sky scrubbed clean of smoke, they stepped down from the platform. The morning belonged to them.